Hello and welcome to Game Shack, and once again we're talking about games that absolutely murdered their franchise, just slaughtered them because it was so bad.
Yeah, no, just hold on there a second, because I don't think all these franchises were murdered by the last games. Actually, some of them were pretty good. I mean, the franchise just died for whatever reason, I don't know. Hold on, we'll find out.
Let's take a look.
Silent Hill originally came out in 1999 on the PlayStation. This is a great survival horror game with a really creepy-ass atmosphere. It also has a cool story and some weird monsters that are just plain bizarre. Silent Hill 2 is even better. It shares the same style of gameplay as the original, and of course that's awesome. More Silent Hill games came and went of varying quality after this one. But the game I want to talk about today is Silent Hill: Book of Memories on the PlayStation Vita. This was the last Silent Hill game released as of this episode in late 2012. And by that I mean the game was released in 2012. This episode isn't being made in 2012. It'd be a lot worse if it were, because we sucked back in 2012. Actually, I don't know, we were starting to get okay back then. But I digress. Believe it or not, this one was actually programmed by WayForward. And sadly, it's not as good as Shantae. She's probably hidden in here somewhere though, I bet. You play as a random create-a-character who's living in an apartment with a low-paying job. One day you get a strange package delivery from Silent Hill. This is a book containing all of your memories. And this is about as close to Silent Hill as this game ever gets. Anyway, since you're a colossal idiot, you decide to edit some of your memories in the book, and that's when you enter the dream world or whatever it is. This takes place entirely in an overhead isometric style view. Just like the original Silent Hill games, you run from action-packed room to action-packed room fighting various enemies. No. This is nothing like Silent Hill at all. And that's really its biggest problem. Still though, the game design isn't bad, at least initially. Anyway, like I was saying, you go from room to room defeating enemies, collecting puzzle pieces, and other items. You can carry 2 weapons at a time to start out with. And just like Zelda Breath of the Wild, your weapons don't last very long before they break. Unlike Breath of the Wild though, you can collect these wrenches which will allow you to fix a worn down weapon before it breaks. You can also collect and store health packs and ammo for a gun if you have one. There's a lot of touchscreen action in this game, which makes it hard to play on a hacked PS TV like I'm doing here, but it can be done. Just know that the game will be slightly more difficult this way. I really wish that some game designers would lose the fetish that they have for touchscreens. I mean, come on, I like touching things just as much as the next guy, but yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. But even if you're playing on the Vita proper, you'll have to take your thumbs off of the action buttons to touch the item you need. At the end of each large area, you'll get to a puzzle which looks like a chessboard. Here, you'll need to place the colored pieces to unlock the next zone. Let me tell you, these are stupid and they add nothing to the gameplay. I just randomly guess where they go and usually it works right away. But if it doesn't, just pull the lever and you'll be told which pieces are wrong. Seriously, it's a big waste of time. There are also shops where you can buy new items, abilities, and extra space in your backpack from the mailman. The currency is the essence that's left behind by dead enemies. Visually, the game isn't anything special. The creatures aren't scary or really even weird at all. The music is good at first, but it starts to wear on you after an hour or so. But the main problem with this game is that each zone is very large and it takes a while to complete. Then the next zone after that looks exactly the same, but it's even bigger. Same with the zone after that. It gets extremely repetitive and very boring. It just needs more variety. And it sure as hell isn't what Silent Hill fans want in a Silent Hill game. And that's its biggest sin. It makes it seem like the franchise is just a moneymaker for Konami and they don't really care about the content at all. It's like their mantra is just to make a game, any game, and slap a popular franchise's name on it. To be honest though, I'm surprised they haven't done up another one considering that this one sold okay. And then in 2014, Konami released a free download for the PlayStation 4 simply called PT. This was intended to act as a playable teaser for the upcoming game headed by Hideo Kojima called Silent Hills. Sadly, this isn't even available to download on the PlayStation Store anymore. Basically, you wake up in a room with absolutely no explanation of anything. You wander the halls while seeing and hearing some creepy-ass stuff. You can't leave the house, and the doorway at the end of the hall just puts you back at the beginning of the first hall. You go through this multiple times, and each time the house changes a little. You can't really do too much here, but the setting and the ambiance is absolutely superb. It doesn't play like a normal Silent Hill game, but it definitely has that same type of creepiness. And I'm not one to get scared at video games, but this little demo absolutely was successful at making me feel uncomfortable and very uneasy. There are some jump scares here, but honestly, they're kind of cool as they don't happen often. Unfortunately, Konami and Hideo Kojima had different visions and they got into a very bitter fight. Hideo Kojima and Konami ended up parting ways, to put it lightly, and the Silent Hills project was cancelled. And that's all she wrote about that. Konami has said that they'd like to continue the franchise in the future, but I'm left wondering how good could it be? Maybe in the future we'll have the opportunity to find out. But Kojima is working on a game called Death Stranding. Will it be the game that PT would have been had it not been cancelled?
You got fired, so you drowned your sorrows in booze. She had to get a part-time job working a grocery store cash register. Only reason she could earn a wage at all is the manager liked how she looked in a skirt.
Earthworm Jim on the Super Nintendo and Genesis were great games. Back in the day, this proved to me that Western developer Shiny Entertainment was the real deal. I really got into Jim as a character with his badass toot and great animations. It also helped that the game was really fun to play with great level design, graphics, music, and control. And Earthworm Jim 2 was exactly what a sequel should be. More of the same awesome gameplay with a few new weapons and even playstyles. It also introduced Jim's friend Snot. Snot could be used to swing from slimy things, which added more depth to each level. Just like the first game, the action was fast and furious and it was loaded with moments of comedy. The music was great, especially if you had the Saturn version. After you played these first two titles, you just knew that these were games that a lot of time and love went into.
Plasma! Way cool!
In comes Earthworm Jim 3D, shown here on the Nintendo 64. Shiny sold the rights to Interplay, which is fine since Interplay usually makes some decent to good games. But Interplay handed it off to VIS Entertainment, a Scottish company who isn't known for anything good. As you can see, the game is using a 3D engine, which might not have been a big deal. A lot of franchises have made successful jumps from 2D to 3D, and Earthworm Jim isn't one of those franchises. The root of the series is pretty much a run-and-gun platformer. VIS decided to slow things down and make this game a fetch quest with lots of collecting. Jim is in a coma from being hit by a flying cow. To escape his subconscious, he must find golden udders which unlock new levels. These golden udders are either laying around or will be given to Jim once he does a favor for somebody. He also collects green marbles which will open up new areas within levels. The gameplay is pretty bad. Jim has his gun and he can whip enemies and other things with his body. His whip feels like it has no length to it and you have to be super close to your enemies to do damage. The thing is, the whip is way more powerful than the gun, so you'll want to use it more. The levels themselves feel bland and uninspired. It feels like a chore as you're walking around sinking in quicksand trying to collect stupid marbles. Collecting and killing enemies isn't satisfying at all. To make matters worse, Jim says random words that you hear way too often, but there's a couple that I can't even understand what he's trying to say. Oh, and then there's the music, which is absolutely painful. The melodies aren't enjoyable and it loops a lot. Since you're in a decent sized level and you're going to spend a lot of time there, you think the music tracks would be just a tad bit longer. But no. It won't take long before you turn down the volume, that is, actually if you want to keep playing.
Ungroovy!
Another game was released in late 1999 for the Game Boy Color. Earthworm Jim Menace to the Galaxy was the last good hope for the franchise to be a good 2D run-and-gun platformer. This title was developed by David A. Palmer Productions. They sound pretty exciting. It didn't take but 2 minutes of gameplay before I realized that this was not going to be the game I was hoping it to be. Yeah, it's basically just a collectathon. Jim must scour each area and collect a certain amount of these coin icons to move on to the next level. So Jim can jump and he can shoot his blaster, but he can't whip anymore. I can't believe Mr. Palmer would leave out one of Jim's signature moves. The levels clearly aren't designed for that feature, so you don't worry about it while you're playing, but man, I really miss that. In all fairness to Mr. Palmer though, if they did include the whip, they would have probably mapped it to the select button or something. The levels are big, there's nice variety in them, and they're decent to look at, but the gameplay is just boring. Killing enemies is boring, and figuring out how to collect all the coins is boring. Jim can get his pocket rocket, and this helps with collecting since you can fly it anywhere, but it's limited to a time bar and will be gone before you can even start to enjoy it. Oh, and don't die in a level because you'll have to start all over at the beginning with nothing collected. That right there is enough for me to not want to play this title ever again. So it's pretty obvious why we haven't seen a new Earthworm Jim in a while. Once Shiny sold off the rights, the franchise was doomed. A boring and slow 3D fetch quest and a collectathon for the color did way more harm than good for Jim. Sure, there was an HD remake in 2010, but it's a remake and not a new title. Since Shiny isn't around anymore, the only hope for a proper Part 3 would be an independent developer, but you know what, I'm not going to hold my hope for that one.
Banjo-Kazooie was a new IP from Rare on the Nintendo 64. Pretty much everyone loved the crap out of this game. The evil witch Grunty is wreaking havoc and only Banjo and Kazooie can save the land together. Everyone also loved the sequel, cleverly called Banjo-Tooie. Anyway, the whole premise of these games is that you play as a big dumb bear named Banjo and also the bird he carries in his backpack named Kazooie. I guess he's aptly named it because he loves playing the kazoo. But I digress. These were really fun early 3D games with tons of stuff to collect in each and every level, and I mean tons of stuff. Maybe even too much stuff. You don't have to collect everything though, so it's okay. The third game was released on the Game Boy Advance and it was called Grunty's Revenge. While not as fun as the original games, it certainly isn't bad. This time, Kazooie's been kidnapped and, of course, you've got to travel back in time to rescue him. I mean, where else could he be? Since it's on the Game Boy Advance, it's just an overhead game, but it still maintains the spirit of the originals. It's definitely different, but hey, it's on a lower-powered portable system, and I honestly really enjoy it. But of course, everyone wanted a proper 3D sequel for newer hardware, and eventually we got Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts for the Xbox 360. This has got to be a fantastic game, right? I mean, it's an HD. And it really does look fantastic, especially compared to the old games. But the problem is that it's still not a proper Banjo and Kazooie game. I mean, they're in here, but they changed the gameplay almost entirely. In fact, the beginning of the game calls Kazooie's moves from previous games outdated. I tell you, outdated or not, I'd still rather have that than what we got here. And what do we get here? Well, basically Grunty is back and the Lord of Games comes down and challenges you both to something, I don't know. It's all very uninteresting and I just wasn't able to force myself to follow the story. But you both get zapped into his video game land, starting with Showdown Town, which is the game's hub world. From here, you can enter various levels once you've managed to unlock them. But the thing is that you spend most of the time riding around in vehicles. You can buy blueprints and parts to build newer and better vehicles over the course of the game. Anyway, each level usually has multiple goals to complete, which you begin by talking to the characters with puzzle pieces over their heads, or jiggies as the game calls them. They'll give you a mission, and if you're successful, you earn a jiggy. These missions can be anything from winning a race, which is best out of 3, to dousing hot volcanic rocks into the water to save the land. Once you're back in Shadow Town, you cash in your jiggies to unlock new levels and new globes. Taking a globe to a new place will unlock a new world with its own levels. Some of these worlds are pretty cool, like this one that's inside your Xbox, or LOGBOX 720 as the game calls it. Now where are those damn X-clamps? Oh yeah, that's right, I'm playing on the Xbox 360 Slim, so they're not going to be in here. Banjo can get out of the vehicle, and he has a few moves like swinging his wrench, jumping, and using some sort of force beam to carry objects around. But sadly, that's really about it as far as platforming moves go. But like I said, it looks fantastic. The graphics are all extremely pleasant and colorful, even if they don't run at the highest frame rate in the world. The music is also well done and fits quite well. Wait, did I just say well twice in that sentence? Oh well. But it's just not Banjo-Kazooie, and despite not being a horrible game, it certainly didn't do the franchise any favors. Especially when it's calling the play mechanics of the original games outdated. And there's not much hope to see a proper Banjo-Kazooie game with Rare being what it is these days. Once Microsoft bought them, they were really never the same. Even Yooka-Laylee isn't very well received, and it's far more faithful to the Banjo-Kazooie play mechanics. I guess that means the franchise is truly dead. But I'm imprisoned in August 2017 when I'm recording this voiceover, and I can't see the future, so you never know.
Alright, so far you can see that these franchises were definitely killed by the last game because they all suck so far.
Yeah, they really did. But there's a franchise that Dave's going to talk about coming up that we're both really, really sad has taken a turn for the worse.
Yeah. Castlevania, in my opinion, is the best franchise in video game history. Yeah, that's right, I said it. With over 29 installments from home console to handheld to arcade titles, with a vast majority being solid, how can anyone deny the prowess of the series? It all started on the NES. This game had great platforming and loads of action. What really drew me in was the atmosphere. I love the art and I definitely love the music. Then the Game Boy got some Castlevania love. Here's Castlevania Adventure 2. This title fixed the small imperfections of the first game and even added sub-weapons. The castles were all very detailed for a Game Boy game, and the soundtrack has some of the best music in the series. The 16-bit consoles weren't strangers to Castlevania either. Bloodlines on the Genesis featured 2 playable characters and let you travel all over Europe to find Dracula and put an end to him for a while. I like this game for the special effects and the multi-jointed bosses. I also like the fact that you can jump on and off of staircases. The music is right up there with the best, and the Genesis never sounded so good. Or how about Harmony of Dissonance on the Game Boy Advance? After the success of Symphony of the Night, it seemed like everything from here on out was going to be in the Metroidvania style. I'm fine with this since I do like exploring large areas in 2D. I always did my best to find everything in the huge castle and loved getting 200% completion. I could play these games constantly. At some point, Konami realized that the series was going to have to go 3D. We know how bad the N64 version turned out, but hey, that was a first attempt. From 2001 to 2010, there was a Castlevania game released every year. These were great times. There's also 3D games like Lament of Innocence on the PS2. Yeah, it looks like Konami didn't learn too many lessons because this game wasn't tremendously good. Battling enemies feels like a chore and it gets boring pretty dang quick. I will say that I do like the set pieces in the game and the soundtrack is actually really good. At this point I figured 2D Castlevania was dead. But in 2009, Konami did a great thing and released Castlevania Adventure The Rebirth on the Wii. Even though it really doesn't feel like Castlevania Adventure besides a few enemies, the game is great. It has good level design and some really nice remixed music from lots of different games in the series. Even using the Wiimote to control the game was easy and fun. It did have one huge problem though. The game was only released digitally! Stupid Konami, why no physical release of all the Rebirth games? Then Lords of Shadow came out in 2010 for PS3, Xbox 360, and PC. There was tension between Konami and Koji Igarashi about poor sales of previous games in the series, so Konami gave the job to Mercury Steam with the help of Hideo Kojima. Konami wanted to reboot the series and let Mercury Steam have a chance at it. Personally, I think this is BS. I think that Konami took a game, Lords of Shadow, which had nothing to do with Castlevania, and changed a few characters and story to reflect the Castlevania universe. Kind of like what Nintendo did with Super Mario Bros. 2. The reason I say this is because Lords of Shadow feels nothing like a Castlevania game. Even the PS2 games like Lament of Innocence, which isn't fun, still feels a bit like Castlevania. This feels like a completely different game altogether. Now don't get me wrong, because it's not a bad game and I actually really do enjoy it. I think it's solid in almost every aspect from platforming to battle. The music is also decent, but I'm not feeling Castlevania here. And 4 years later, Lords of Shadow 2 was released. Now this one does have a little of that Castlevania feel to it, but overall it still feels very different. The story is loaded with characters from Castlevania's history, but once you get into the action, this could just be any other 3D platformer out there. I do like some aspects of the game, like being able to change into a rat at certain points. I like the set pieces of Gabriel's castle, and I like the exploration aspects, but there's also a lot that I don't like. I don't like how they handled Gabriel climbing all over walls or humongous robot things. It's very clunky and it's not easy or enjoyable like it is, say, in God of War or Uncharted. Also, jumping from swinging chandeliers is a pain in the ass and doesn't feel natural at all. In the end, this game didn't score very well among reviewers, and that might be why we haven't seen a Lords of Shadow 3. And you know what? That might be a good thing, because these last two titles have done nothing to help the good name of Castlevania in most people's minds. But one thing's for sure, and that is Igarashi is hard at work making a 2.5D spiritual sequel to Symphony of the Night titled Bloodstained. It's not from Konami, and I'm fine with that, given that Konami likes to make pachinko games these days and their management is highly questionable.
You can't destroy.
Dino Crisis from Capcom first appeared on PlayStation in 1999. This is a pretty cool game that's set in the future. That's right, in 2009. It's like Resident Evil, but with dinosaurs instead of zombies. This one doesn't have any pre-rendered backgrounds. Instead, they're built with polygons and they move as you move. You'll still encounter some awkward angles and tank controls though. That's okay by me, and the game is really fun. And of course, the game has some little puzzles for you to solve in order to advance. No big deal, I'm smart, I got this, I can match those colors, yeah boy! Even though it doesn't have zombies and it has silly dinosaurs instead, it still manages to have a creepy and fun environment. Dino Crisis 2 came out on the PlayStation the next year, and it takes place a year later after the original. Instead of being a survival horror game, this one is mostly about action. I mean, you even get combos and stuff by shooting multiple dinosaurs. Holy crap, they are everywhere. There's no tension about what's around the next corner here, because you know it's going to be a dinosaur. They're around every damn corner. The backgrounds are now pre-rendered. You can control both Regina and this dude throughout the adventure. It's not as good as the first game, but you know what? I still kind of enjoy it. In 2002, we got Dino Stalker on the PlayStation 2, which is an offshoot of the series. This one's a light gun shooter, but of course you can play it with a regular control pad like I'm doing here. Yeah, I know, I suck as a human being. You play a fighter pilot from 1942 who is zapped into whatever land this is. You'll have to play to find out. You're not on rails or anything, you can wander around and stuff, and it gets kind of boring as the stages can be really big with not a lot of variety. But still, I enjoyed what I played of it, and we may take a look at this one again in the future once we get a proper light gun for the PS2. And in 2003, there was Dino Crisis Dungeon in Chaos. This one was an ancient mobile phone game, and as a result, we can't show you gameplay. However, also in 2003, Dino Crisis 3 came out, and it was only released on the Xbox. And naturally, this game takes place in the year 2548. In space! That could only make it more awesome, right? Well, Capcom sure as hell thought so. Sadly, it doesn't. Anyway, your group arrives to investigate a derelict spaceship that's been missing for 300 years and suddenly appeared by Jupiter. And of course, you just know that this ship is going to be piloted by some evil dinosaurs. And they destroy your ship, but a few of you manage to make it aboard safely. Suddenly, you find yourself fighting dinosaurs from Jupiter, and they are really mean. And from space. This one goes back to the way the original game worked, meaning that it doesn't use pre-rendered backgrounds, but instead those built with polygons. The camera angles are still wonky and will switch quite often. In fact, the camera here is by far the worst in any Dino Crisis game, and that is saying a lot. You do have a first-person mode where you can look at anything you want, but you can't move here. You also have a map to help you figure out where you're facing and where you're trying to go, but it's difficult and annoying to make heads or tails of. I got lost quite a bit, and even with the map I had a hard time finding my way out of some rooms. A lot of these rooms can be like puzzles. But your spacesuit is cool, and it has a few abilities like a jump and a dash. Your gun has rapid fire with auto aiming. Or you can even hold it to fire a bigger and more powerful shot to help you along the way. I wasn't able to find a controller layout that I really liked, however, as the jump was assigned to the B button, and I don't like that. The graphics are sure nice and shiny. They come in at 480p and even in widescreen. But honestly, most areas of the ship look too similar with the same shiny metallic surfaces. The sound is really well done, but there's not a whole lot of music here, sadly. It's too bad that this game had to jump over 500 years in the future with fake space dinosaurs. I mean, Jason X made that same mistake with the Friday the 13th movies. You know your franchise is out of ideas when you decide to make it take place in space.
The Magical Quest starring Mickey Mouse is a platformer for the Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance from Capcom. This is the Super Nintendo version here. Being a fan of both Disney and Capcom, I bought this game when it was released back in 1992 and I wasn't disappointed at all. Mickey controls well, and to defeat his enemies he can jump on their heads, which will make them dizzy. When they're dizzy, he can pick them up and throw them into other enemies, which will take them out as well. To make things a bit more interesting than your average platformer, Capcom added the ability to change outfits during the game. Now these aren't just normal changes of clothes, these outfits grant you new powers. There's 3 of them here, but you have to progress in the game to unlock all of them. These outfits really add a bit of strategy to the gameplay, and the best part about them is that you can change them at any time you want after you have them. Of course, since they have abilities like shooting magic as a magician or spraying water from a hose like a fireman, they have a meter that'll drain. But fear not, because there's always plenty of icons to pick up that will refill your magic meter. One thing to note about the Game Boy Advance version is that it's a remake for the handheld, and while the game hasn't changed, it included Minnie Mouse as a playable character. She controls exactly like Mickey, so the only difference is which mouse you'd rather play as. The Great Circus Mystery starring Mickey and Minnie was released a couple of years later in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, Genesis, and the Game Boy Advance. For some reason, Capcom decided to drop the title Magical Quest 2 for the Super Nintendo and Genesis versions, but the Game Boy Advance version retained it. As far as the sequel goes, this game did it right. It kept all of the things that made the first game great, like platforming, amazing graphics, great level design, and a soundtrack that is very reminiscent of Disney. And of course, the ability to change outfits is still here. There's 3 new outfits to collect this time around, and again, they're all really fun to use and you can switch between them on the fly. I think that I like the outfits in the first game better, but you know, these serve their purpose. I think I like the Western outfit the best since you can actually shoot a projectile unlike the other 2 offered in the game. As the title suggests, Minnie is a playable character. Again, she controls the same as Mickey in every aspect, so your choice will be based solely on aesthetics and or gender of the character. Probably the best new feature added this time around was the ability to play with 2 players at once. If you have a friend or a kid that wants to play this game, you can both play together at the same time. Oh, it's a truly fascinating time that we live in, and I'm glad to be here to enjoy it. The final game in the trilogy is, yes, you guessed it, Disney's Magical Quest 3 starring Mickey and Donald. This 1995 title was released in North America only on the Game Boy Advance. It saw a release in Japan on the Super Famicom and no release for the lowly Genesis. The obvious change is the exit of Minnie Mouse and the appearance of Donald Duck. I'm fine with that, as Donald is probably my favorite Disney character. He's had quite a few good games and I always welcome more. Just like the previous titles, Donald and Mickey are identical in control, and since I like Donald more, I usually play as him. But I've got to point out the attention to detail the developers gave. The first outfit in this game is a suit of armor. For Mickey, it's actual armor and his javelin is a boxing glove. This looks cool, but if he gets in water, he sinks, which, you know, that's not cool. Donald, on the other hand, gets a barrel and a pan for armor and a mallet that's used like a hammer. When Donald gets into water, he floats since he's in a barrel. Or maybe because he's a duck, I don't know. Yes, and there's other outfits as well. They look different on each character, but they're used in the same way. Poor Donald, he always gets the shaft, but he plays along so well. I'm really impressed that the developers put more thought into this game instead of making everything the same. I'm not sure why this franchise was killed off. Was it because the end of the Super Famicom was coming quickly and Capcom was afraid of bad sales? Coming out in North America only on the Game Boy Advance didn't do much good for the series. Maybe it should have been a PlayStation game. They have a really good thing going with this series and the possibilities were great. I would have loved to have had a part 4 with Donald and Goofy and a few new outfits. We'll never know, I guess, but if Capcom ever looks back at a franchise to rebirth, then this should be one of them.
All right, and those are some franchise killers for you. Damn, Dave, I totally agree. Magical Quest 3 just murdered that franchise. It was just so bad.
No, you got it the wrong way. It didn't murder it. It was actually just a great game, and Capcom murdered the franchise.
You know, actually, it was a good game, Magical Quest 3.
It was a fun game, and where is it, Capcom? Bring it back.
Indeed. And what are some more games that you feel killed franchises that maybe we should take a look at? I mean, combined with our first Franchise Killers episode, are there really too many more to look at? Let us know, and in the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack.
Hey, Joe.
Oh, hey, Dave. Would you like to play some Solar Eclipse on the Sega Saturn by Crystal Dynamics?
Solar Eclipse? Hell yeah, dude. Sweet, dude. This game looks awesome. Solar Eclipse. Hey, you said I could play. This is sweet. Joe, are you getting this?
How long you ain't supposed to look for?
Oh yeah! Solar Eclipse is the right name for this game. Oh my god, this is so cool!
Hello and welcome to GameSack. Dave, you here?
Yeah, I'm over here, Joe.